So I was really hoping to get this Infinity Gauntlet that I ordered like 2 weeks ago by the time I made this video so that I could have it. And of course, the day that I try to film this, I get a ring at the doorbell around the time that mail comes. I'm like, oh, great. But it's just food for Dennis DeYoung. Then the doorbell rings again, and I run back downstairs, and I forgot that my doorbell has been broken for the past week, and it's just been going off randomly. So I'm pretty disappointed. Hopefully that gets there by Infinity War. Probably not. I have no faith in Trendosity. Anyway, welcome to another series of movie reviews. And I figured since I'll be seeing Infinity War tomorrow, and I've been marathoning the MCU movies with my friends, I figured now would be a great time to kind of review all of the MCU movies and rank them as they are compared to each other. I'm not going to waste your time describing what the MCU is. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you know. So let's just get right into it, going from worst to best. At the bottom of my list is The Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk, at best, is like it's alright if there's just kind of like a movie on, I guess, but it is so much more boring than I remember it being. I thought this movie was like at least okay, like I thought it was like an acceptable movie, but after rewatching it, oh my god, it was so immensely boring. Ed Norton just does not fit as Bruce Banner whatsoever. And yeah, it's kind of weird that they don't explain in Avengers how he now just kind of looks like Mark Ruffalo, but it's so worth it because he's so boring and quiet and just nothing as Bruce Banner. You don't believe that he's like a smart person at all. Even the actions and the CGI is the final fight's like kind of okay. The music is like awful and just boring and like stock music. The love interest dynamic stuff is super boring too. Betty is just completely boring. Everything about this movie is just boring. It's just not worth talking about. And this movie is just so far below, I think, basically every other MCU movie. Up next, we have the original Thor. This was kind of another movie that I thought I enjoyed more than I did on rewatching it, but this movie is kind of boring too, honestly, especially when Thor's on Earth and it's not just straight up comedy, which I mean those scenes are really funny, but when it's more story focused and when he's trying to get back to Asgard, it's like pretty boring. Jane's kind of interesting. I think as far as love interest goes, she's like all right, but I don't care about Thor's group of friends whatsoever. I'm happy later on when they just get killed off in Ragnarok. The Loki in this movie just is not the fun, crazy Loki that we see later on, so he's kind of like I like that he's consistently changing sides even now, but as of right now, he's just like an okay villain. Music's boring, like I said. There's a ton of these like tilted angles. I think they're like Dutch angles, especially on Asgard. And it just doesn't look good because maybe there'd be times where you could use it for a cool comic booky effect or a cool dramatic effect with Loki, but it's like every other shot at the beginning of the movie, and I think pretty consistently throughout the movie except kind of on Earth, and I just hate it. It seems like a completely like non-thought out choice, and they just kind of did it because they thought it looked cool. The visuals are okay. Asgard starts to look way better in future Thor movies. And yeah, overall, in general, I just don't like the Thor movies that much until Ragnarok. So it didn't really surprise me that this movie ranked so low for me. And the same goes for Thor: The Dark World. The first time I watched it, it was my least favorite movie. It just completely bored me, and I did not care about anything going on in that movie at all. When I rewatch it, it's better than I remember it being, but it's still very generic and bland. There's a couple moments where you can kind of see where they wanted to take Thor in the future with Ragnarok, like at the beginning of the final fight, and then Thor and Malachi? Those two start fighting in their big dramatic fight, and then they start warping through all the worlds, and then Thor's on the subway. That stuff was great, and then the fight just got pretty boring. It also got really boring because the ether is incredibly ill-defined. For being the reality stone, it just didn't really seem powerful whatsoever. We didn't feel its effects or what it could do. Like all the other Infinity Stones we've seen so far have had a pretty massive impact, but this one, I don't think they realized how important they wanted to make the Infinity Stones yet, or at least they did a poor job of it. All the side characters that are supposed to be comedic are kind of annoying. Jane again is okay. Asgard actually looks really good in this, and there are some really cool, really good looking shots. And in terms of other positive stuff, Loki in this is great. I think this is the Loki that everyone really wanted to see, and they pushed that even further in Ragnarok, which is great. His scenes when he first gets out of jail and he's shape-shifting and all that, I like that a lot. That's really funny. Lady Sif is also a pretty cool character, but overall it's just the epitome of kind of generic bland Marvel movie with a horrible villain. Now we're at Iron Man 2, and putting this movie above the first two Thor movies, I think a lot of people would disagree with, but going back, Iron Man 2 isn't that bad, really. I think not going into it with expectations or not knowing what to expect, I think it's a pretty decent movie, because I like Tony Stark a lot, and you'll see that with my movie picks later on. But I like Tony Stark, I like Tony and Pepper. I think that this is a decent introduction of Black Widow compared to Hawkeye and Thor, which is like nothing. But yeah, the beginning of this movie is like really good and like pretty engaging. I'm totally invested in what's going on. But as it goes on and Whiplash and Hammer start to work together, it gets super boring. And that's something I'll talk about, how Iron Man 2 is boring compared to Iron Man 3 is annoying. But I'll explain why Iron Man 3 is above Iron Man 2 in a second. But focusing back on this movie, it's really not awful. The humor is okay. I like the growth of Tony as a character, and I think that this movie got a harder rap than it should have, along with Iron Man 3. Going back and watching it again, it's fine. It just loses a ton of momentum. The final fight's boring, and overall it's not super memorable, especially compared to Iron Man. Before I continue talking about Iron Man, though, I'm going to take a little detour and talk about Doctor Strange. At first, when I saw this movie, I thought I liked it more than Ant-Man, which are two movies I kind of consider to be along those like generic Marvel kind of lines, but I'm not a super big fan of this movie overall. I think the visual effects are really cool, but at the same time, I'm spoiled by people like Nolan with Inception, and the fact that those are practical or at least look much more realistic than just the kaleidoscope nonsense that goes on in this movie. It kind of takes away from that for me. The music is great. Michael Giannacci, I think his name is, he's an amazing composer, and I'll talk about him later with Spider-Man for sure. And those things, and the final boss fight not being an actual fight, but him using his powers and actually finding a clever way out of the situation, are all things I really appreciate. But overall, there's a ton of stuff in this movie that doesn't work for me, and I just think it's a very generic Marvel movie alongside Dark World and Ant-Man. I think all the villains in this movie are very lame, even though the magic side of stuff is cool. I think they totally do a disservice to that. I don't care about Doctor Strange that much. He seems just kind of like another generic protagonist with a ton of quips. So I don't know how he'll work in Infinity Wars with the other 18 of them. I don't like the cape at all. I hate that the cape is like this Harry Potter magic carpet kind of thing that is like supposed to be humorous and just undercuts a lot of the drama of the movie. And then they go for the Hulk beating Loki thing with the cape and the dude in the hallway. I just that annoys me. A lot of the humor just didn't really work for me. I would like them to take it a little bit more seriously. Like if it felt more like a Harry Potter movie, I think I'd be a little more okay with it. But yeah, overall, it's just kind of eh. Like, I was never bored watching it, but I was unentertained sometimes. So back to Iron Man, we have Iron Man 3. This movie is not as bad as anyone says whatsoever. I think that the main hate from this movie comes from people not liking the twist with the Mandarin, or not liking how little we see of kind of Iron Man action, but I completely disagree with both of those viewpoints. I think the Mandarin twist is kind of cool, and I do not give a shit about the comics. I don't care if they change things up from the comics. I just want to see a good movie, and I think that's fine. I think that Ben Kingsley was funny once the twist was revealed. And in terms of action, I don't care because I love seeing Tony Stark's anxiety and panic attacks. I think that's a great growth of character, and I think that impact is felt moving forward for sure. The bad things that I do agree with on this movie is that the villains are lame. The villains are just very generic and disposable and boring. I think the final fight is cool. It's better than the final fight of Iron Man 2, but again, it's kind of disserviced by not understanding why some of these suits are so weak and what exactly the firepower, forget what extremists, not knowing how exactly that works or how powerful it is. And like I said, Iron Man 2 is boring. Iron Man 2 definitely loses a lot of steam and makes me lose interest, but this movie has more kind of stupid stuff going on of like, why is this character acting like this? Why are you doing that when you can be standing further away in safety doing it? There's a lot of stuff like that annoys me, but it comes down to, I find being bored more offensive than being annoyed at a movie, because I can get over annoyance and stupidity more than boredom, because at the end of the day, a movie is supposed to entertain me. And Iron Man 3 did. I was laughing the whole way through. I think there's a ton of really great jokes. And yeah, it's not that bad. I will say though that this is the point where a lot of Marvel movies start to get really generic, and they stopped getting super bad, but they did get generic and lose a lot of style, I think. Ant-Man is a movie I did not like for a pretty long while. I thought that it was, like I said, very generic, very overly comical compared to some of the story elements. But going back and watching it, it's a lot of fun. I think that the humor actually completely works, and I was laughing a ton. I think that the Michael Pena stuff is... Pena? I'm sorry, I'm horrible with names. I think all of that is really funny and works really well. Paul Rudd just fits the character great, and I think picking somebody who carries himself more dramatically would definitely undercut Ant-Man. They definitely played up the silliness of it to the level that they needed to, as to not make this completely stupid. Oh, also the music in this is really cool too. I don't know who the composer was, but I think this and Doctor Strange both have really good memorable themes compared to a lot of Marvel, and not counting joint superhero themes like Avengers or Guardians. But the things I don't like about this movie, I do not care about the father-daughter stuff at all. I think all of that stuff kind of sucks, and it's just kind of thrown in there so that we can get a reason why she's not the Wasp yet. The training sequence I was a tiny bit bored in. I think it's fun. Maybe it's because it's intercut with the father-daughter stuff too. I don't know. There's a couple things about this movie that don't work for me, and it's not one I'm trying to go back and rewatch, but I think it's really funny. I think it's really entertaining. The final fight is very well shot compared to a lot of Marvel. There's a ton of just like really grounded feeling when they're small, and then along with the cutouts into the wides where we see that it's a super tiny fight with very low consequence, and then the massive Thomas and the massive Ant. I think all that's great, but overall as a movie it's just kind of like, yeah, it's good. This movie is good. I think that it deserves the skepticism that it gets, because it is kind of a mess for sure. It starts pretty strongly. I think it has decent action scenes, even though some of the CGI characters jumping and flying around does kind of look a little bit weird. But I think it starts pretty strong. It's when Ultron becomes a giant robot man that this movie starts to really lose me. I despise Ultron, honestly. I think that he looks awful, and he would look way better as some kind of practical robot like a Terminator. And I think that his motivations are very cloudy. I hate that he's so humorous. I wish that we could see the influence of Tony Stark without him being Tony Stark. And I just do not like him as a villain whatsoever. So he brings down a lot of the movie for me. A lot of the character interplay scenes are really good. Everyone likes to talk about the party scene, which I do agree is really good. And I also like the vision scene. But I think there are some jokes that don't work at all. I think there's some jokes that are downright offensive if you look into it. The costuming is good. The music is fine. The editing for fight scenes, especially near the end, is very bad, and it's just too close, so you can't tell what anything is or what's going on. I think the Hulk Widow stuff could be okay if they continue it, as long as they don't just keep her jumping around from person to person. But I mean, that's more of they don't know how to write Black Widow at all, so we'll see. I think the wide shots where it's following the flying truck bed or looking at Sokovia flying, I think those look good, but some of the other CG, like I said, is kind of eh. Overall, it's good. I would totally watch it if it's on. Like, I think it's a good movie, but it is definitely a mess. That's the best way to describe it. Now we're into the movies that I actively would say that I enjoy and are my top kind of group of Marvel movies, starting with Captain America: The First Avenger. This was a movie I thought was like earlier on, but going back and rewatching it, it's a lot of fun. I like this movie a lot, and I should say that I do love Captain America. He might be my favorite Avenger, so I'm a little bit biased, but I think the style of this movie is really good. I think the costume for Cap looks great, much better than Avengers. And Ultron is pretty good too, because it goes back to that more kind of real padded feel. I think that the character of Steve Rogers is really fun. I love him and Peggy, and I love Peggy Carter in general. Red Skull is the type of simplistic villain that a simplistic villain should be, because he's not joking around all the time. He's not just like the hero, you know. He's an asshole. He's a Nazi, but he has a very clear motivation. He's intimidating, and I think the practical effects look amazing. I think it has good music too. I think it has an alright Cap theme from what I can remember. The only negative I would say is that when there is a ton of CGI, it doesn't look very good. It's definitely dated, but I like this movie a pretty good bit. I think that it's kind of an epitome of a superhero movie, like an American superhero movie. Now we're on to Black Panther, which I saw for the third time 2 days ago. It's still in theaters with like 4 showings a day, which I think is amazing, and I am extremely happy with the reception that this movie's getting, because that means they'll make good, diverse movies like this moving forward. I think that there is a ton to get out of this movie, and any criticisms that I have of this movie don't come from that angle. It's more from a filmmaking angle. But I would absolutely not argue this film's importance to anyone, because it's like, well, I don't have to say, because everyone knows what this movie is at this point. So the good things about this movie, I think that the costuming and all of the cultural kind of stuff is great. I love the Afrofuturism. I think that the music has some pretty cool moments. I think besides the visual effects, which I'll talk about later, the film looks really good. I think it's like very colorful and vibrant. I like Black Panther. I gotta say I liked him a little more in Civil War. I feel like he was a little bit more motivated in that movie, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. But I do like Black Panther. I love all the side characters and their kind of motivations. I really enjoy Andy Serkis, because he's just like a nut, and I also like that they had the guts to officially just kill him off too. And I love Killmonger. I think he's a great villain, and I don't agree with the whole that he's not even a villain kind of thing, because the moral of this movie, I think, is that at the end of the day, you can't let hatred and the need to get revenge take over, and that's something that Black Panther learned in Civil War, and I think they wanted to kind of carry over into this movie as well. Finally, normally I would say that this movie would come below First Avenger for me, but there's a lot to think about in this movie that there usually isn't in other Marvel movies, and that almost would put it higher than the next movie in my ranking, but unfortunately the VFX and CGI looks like dog shit. There's some scenes that are okay with it, like there's some scenes where it's noticeable but it doesn't really bug me, but the final fight between Killmonger and Panther when they're both in the suits looks awful. I just don't know what happened to the budget. I don't know what happened with that and the rhinos, and just why it looks so bad. It looks so poorly defined or animated. Something is just bad about it, and it looks like the scene of the original Iron Man suit in Iron Man 1, and that was 10 years ago. And that really brings the movie down for me, because I like the Black Panther suit and I like the action. I like the more practical action, but that just brings the movie down so much for me. I also think that Black Panther's character isn't super motivated, like I said. I think that he's consistently being influenced by the people around him, but he doesn't really know what to do. In the beginning of this movie, he's kind of just taking in things from Nakia and Okoye and Wakabi, and they're just kind of throwing all these different views at him. And then he talks with his dad in the astral plane. And until the end of the movie, he doesn't really make a choice with all of these things. He's kind of just content to sit there and let Wakanda stay static, compared to the Black Panther in Civil War, where he was kind of divergent from his father's thought process, and he was a lot more motivated. I think he's kind of just in this movie. I like him, but overall he's more affected by the things happening around him than he is affecting the things around him. But besides that, I think it's very engaging. I think it's funny, and I do like it a lot. Next up, we have The Avengers, which has not aged perfectly. The costumes do not look good, and some of the dialogue is very annoying to me. I don't like how Shakespearean Loki and Thor feel in this movie, and Tony is kind of annoying at times. But I think this movie looks great. I think the action and music is really good. I do like watching it once they're all a team, even though until that point it does feel a little bit slow. But it's just a good movie, honestly. I think it's very enjoyable to watch. It loses a little bit of interest after you've seen it so many times, but I think it's still a really good movie. I like the characters in it. They're not as good as in Civil War per se, but I do think it's just a really fun, enjoyable movie. Now we're at Thor Ragnarok, and I do want to put a note here that I have not rewatched Thor Ragnarok yet because I wanted to keep it until the day before. I'm recording this the day before, so I haven't rewatched it yet, but I think I remember enough of it to place it accurately. If I change my mind, then I'll put that at the beginning of my Infinity War review. Thor Ragnarok is hilarious. I love Taika Waititi. I think it's a really good looking movie. I think it's just fun. I think it's entertaining. I think it's a great movie overall. I love this version of Thor. I think this is the best version of Loki so far, where he's not even really a villain anymore. He's just kind of an asshole who's going to change sides accordingly, who doesn't want to like rule the world or anything. Or even when he did, it wasn't like a megalomaniac. He was just kind of like having fun. I love the locations. I love the look of it. I think that Hulk and Banner work really great in this movie. The villain, I think, is a little bit better than normal boring Marvel. Like I said, there's a ton of amazing humor, like with the Snake story and Korg, and overall, it's just a hilarious, fun movie. The cons of this movie are that I think looking at Thor 1 and Thor 2, if you watch the 3 movies in a row, this is like a full turnaround for the feel of this character in this universe, which was necessary to make an engaging movie, but it does kind of completely throw off how I interpret the character. It does kind of turn Thor into like every other leading man, where he's always making jokes. He's a little bit more oblivious and a little bit more regal about it. They kind of followed the formula in some ways, even while they just took it completely off the wall in others. I am worried about Infinity War because on one hand I do want to see this Thor come into it so that we have some consistency, and I do like this Thor a lot. I like that he's just kind of like a bro. At the same time, I've read that the Russos want to kind of redefine him, and Chris Hemsworth is not a fan of that, and I agree with that. I think that could be detrimental and confusing to the character of Thor in general. So they're kind of on like a weird path, but we'll see. I trust them overall, especially after watching Civil War. Now we're on to my top 6 movies, and literally any of these could be my favorite on a given day. I love them all a lot, but these are generally, the way I rank this is kind of what movie would I want to watch every night of a week, basically. So starting my top 6 is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Like I said, I love Captain America, and because of that, this is an amazing movie. I love the kind of politics behind it. I love the way that Cap has to grow and change in it. I think the action is really cool, even if some of the editing is not very good. I think the costume is good, even if the film's look is kind of a bit gray. And the only other main negative I would say about it is that the shield is absolutely ridiculous in this movie. Oh, I forgot to talk about this in Ultron. I kind of would rather have the shield just do this insane bouncing around and coming back to Cap and just accept that it's insane, rather than be like, oh, now he has a magnet that brings it back to his arm. Like, oh, who cares? Just let the shield fly around, even if it's hilarious and stupid. But other than that, I find this movie super engaging. I think the music is good, the action's good. Black Widow is actually a pretty interesting character in this. I think Black Widow in the Cap series is the best that they've done Black Widow so far, even if her hair kind of looks weird in this movie. I think that Falcon plays off of Cap and Black Widow very well. Overall, I just think it's like a really cool movie. Guardians of the Galaxy 1. This and Guardians 2 are very, 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 very close for me. I think that, again, depending on what type of movie I'd want to watch on a given day, this could come above that. But either way, I still love Guardians a lot. I think that's hilarious, even if sometimes I think Rocket can be a little grating over time. But I think that it's hilarious, it's fun, it's very colorful. Not as colorful as Guardians 2, which is why that's above this. But I think it's unique. I love seeing all the factions. I think this is a great side of the universe that we hadn't really gotten to see yet, so I love this a lot. I just love their group dynamic. I think that Groot is the best that he's been so far in this movie, and I hope that we get to see adult Groot again soon, because I think that's how he plays the best. This is a really good Drax as well. I think in Guardians 2 they can make him a little too comical sometimes, and that brings it down, which I'll talk about. But he's like very determined and narrowed in on his focus in this movie, which I like a lot. Nebula is in this. She gets a lot better. Ronan is an okay villain. I would put him along the same lines as Hela in terms of being an interesting villain. Thanos is here, which is nice to actually finally see him influence the universe, but I don't think he's as threatening as some people make him out to be. And then there's just like the usual kind of movie stuff that happens that is kind of silly. But overall, I love all the characters and I like this franchise a lot, which is why this is placed right here. And then we have Guardians 2. Guardians 2 is nearly exactly everything I would want to see out of a franchise like this. It's super colorful, it's cartoony, it's campy, and it's just over the top goofy, and I love that. I like when they do like the 100 whatever jumps and their faces are just getting all weird. Ego's playing it, looks great. I think all the musical scenes are great, like with the arrow just going around killing everyone. There's just so many things in this movie where I'm just dying, and I love this movie. The main negatives about it are, I think that some of the character development is weird. Like, I think Gamora, they did a bit worse in this, because now she just kind of feels like the typical kind of annoying girlfriend, where she's just always kind of like the straight person of the group and just kind of babying some of the other people. I think there's definitely ways that they could have done her better. And Drax, while I think he has a ton of funny lines, he is a bit too humorous in this movie, and his jokes go on for way too long sometimes, especially when it's him and Mantis. Like the whole him finding her ugly stuff. I don't know why they keep going on that. It's not that funny. But I think that there's some really great scenes, not only of action, but just emotional stuff too, like with Drax and Mantis, and he's just kind of like being real stoic and all, then she reaches out and feels him and she just like starts crying. I think that's a really cool scene. I wish that Drax would have gotten a little serious after that point, but either way, I think this movie is just fantastic. The pinnacle of Captain America movies, and so far honestly the best Avengers movie that we've seen, Captain America Civil War. Civil War is fantastic. I'm gonna say fantastic about 12 million times with these top movies, but I mean it's just amazing to me. It's so enjoyable. I could watch it at any time. I think that each character has a simple but effective motivation for why they side with who they side with. I think that there's some really, really great dialogue between Cap and Tony. I think that the fight scenes are amazing. Look-wise, this movie could be a bit better, but costume-wise and effects-wise, it's like pretty good, pretty solid. The only time where this movie loses me even a little bit is in between the airport fight and the final fight. I think that gets a tiny bit dull, but then the final fight kicks in. And the first time I saw that whole sequence where Zemo reveals his plan with like Tony and Bucky and all that, I was just like, oh my god. I was just ready to go. Speaking of Zemo, he definitely detracts from this movie a lot. I think if there's maybe a way to push it just so that the Avengers broke apart naturally, I would have liked that way more, even though Zemo does help Black Panther learn kind of a little bit. But yeah, I think Zemo is just really, his motivations are all over the, well, not his motivations, but his plan is just all over the place. And he brings this movie down a little bit, which is why it's not my favorite, but it's still an amazing movie. What I thought forever was my favorite MCU movie, and it still could be, maybe rewatching my number 1 and 2 movies later down the road, but I still love this movie, and it is of course the original Iron Man. Tony Stark is fantastic. Robert Downey Jr. is fantastic as Tony Stark. Everything just feels so real and grounded. The use of practical effects, or at least well blending of CGI, it looks like it just makes the movie feel amazing. The action scenes are so heavy and intense, and I love it. And then even when there's bad CGI, that was 10 years ago, so it's like, it's okay. The music is really cool. This is like a pretty decent Iron Man theme with like the rock music. I think that as a villain, Obadiah is kind of cool, and me and my friends enjoyed turning his one line into a meme for like a week.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
The only negatives I have about this movie is that the final fight is kind of Don Cheadle is now better as War Machine, and there's some jokes that are definitely outdated. So rewatching is kind of like, okay. But I love this movie. It's still one of my favorite movies of all time. It's so good. But rewatching all of the movies in the MCU, it was unable to beat out my number 1 movie. Spider-Man Homecoming. This movie is just perfect. I love this movie. I think it is the best Spider-Man movie. I don't care that Raimi may have been a more interesting director. I think that Tom Holland as Spider-Man and as Peter Parker just 100% nails it, and I could watch him just all the time. And that's what it came down to, is that I could watch Spider-Man Homecoming all the time. I love it. It still makes me laugh every time. I think the action's a ton of fun. Vulture is my favorite MCU villain. I love how grounded and realistic his goals are, and I just love this movie so much. I think it's emotional. I think that it's tense when it wants to be, especially in the car ride. The only negative I could say about it is that some of the MJ jokes don't really land with me, and I think the suit AI is kind of questionable. I don't know if I like that, but overall, I just love this movie, and I cannot wait to watch more Spider-Man. So, now it's time to talk about Infinity War. I'm going to be seeing it very, very soon, so I want to share some of my predictions so that I can gauge them before and after seeing the movie, and kind of talk about where I think this movie is going to be in terms of quality. I'm going to actually use my computer for notes now, so give me a second. Characters being one-dimensional is something I'm definitely very afraid of. Now, this is the Russos who gave us Civil War, where everyone, even if they're a little underdeveloped, they have a very clear goal and a very clear motivation. So I do trust them, but I mean, how could you not be worried about that with like the 50 million people they have in this movie? I think that Thanos is, in the end, going to have been very overblown as a villain. It's hard to beat a villain who has such realistic, simple goals. So somebody as massive and as large scale as this, either they show his true power and he just completely starts wiping everyone out, and that's how they make him a really cool villain, is when they give his actions stakes, or they're going to nerf him and nerf the Infinity Stones, and it's just kind of be like, So I mean, hopefully Thanos becomes my favorite villain, but I'm not I'm not expecting him to be. In general, this movie could go super safe and kill like a couple people and it'd be like, whatever. Or this movie could go the way I want it to and Thanos just wipes out nearly everyone. I would love to see that. But I don't think they have the guts. So, I mean, we'll see. Prove me wrong. In terms of the deaths, I think that the most likely are somebody in kind of the Cap crew. Maybe Cap himself, I wouldn't be overly surprised, but maybe Bucky, maybe Sam. I think Mantis is a really good one for it because her main use with Ego is kind of over, so maybe they'll kill her off before Guardians 3. War Machine, maybe. Hawkeye, maybe. Any of those kind of like the people who they're not going to get their own movie and the franchises like Iron Man aren't going to continue, so they might kill them off. I think Thor dying is very, very possible. I know it's just marketing, so we haven't seen Thor necessarily in the shots that they've shown yet, but not having seen Thor in like those giant running scenes, I think he's going to die before he even gets to Earth, and I think that Hulk is going to land on Earth somehow and have to warn people. Vision dying, I think, is a pretty safe bet, obviously, and Nebula dying, I would not be surprised at all. The only other thing I'm kind of afraid of is the Children of Thanos. I feel like that's adding like 5 more characters I do not want to see. I want to see Thanos. He's finally out of the chair. He's finally off the ship, and he's just going to go down and get what he wants and kill people. I don't like that he's going to have his little goons running around and doing his work for him, even if they look kind of cool. And I don't care if they come out of the comics. Again, I do not care what the story is in the comics or what the lore is. As long as it's a good movie, then I'll enjoy it. But I don't think adding these unnecessary middlemen is going to help Thanos be the villain that he deserves to be. But in general, I am hopefully skeptical with these movies, as always. I think that there's a good chance that the lowest this movie will rank for me is right above Ragnarok, like below or above Ragnarok. And I don't want to say that I'm already counting it out as my favorite movie, but how are you going to beat Iron Man and Spider-Man? I hope they do, because I mean, obviously I want to watch amazing movies, but like I said, I'm hopefully skeptical. So I'll be seeing this movie in some hours. I don't know when this video is going to be uploaded, but I will definitely record my reactions to that. I hope you've enjoyed my talks about these movies. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the other side of Infinity War.